Okay, xin chào. Dạ, xin chào. Okay, so I've made it to the Imperial City of Hue. This was the imperial capital of dynastic Vietnam before the French colonized the place. So we're just gonna take a tour today. Um, yep. It's a really hot day, 90 degrees, and high 60% humidity. Or I wouldn't say 90 degrees, it feels like 90 degrees, but it's just 83 with 70% humidity. So I'm just sweating standing here. But here we are inside the Imperial Palace. It was built starting in 1805 and finished in 1832, and it lasted until the end of World War II, 1945. It was the seat of the last dynasty in Vietnam, a little less than 150 years. There's a nice breezeway coming through here. So this was restored at the end of 2024. It had fallen in ruins over the decades because it was bombed by the French and the Americans during the Vietnam Wars. And so there used to be buildings here, but of course they just got blown up by bombs. And so the buildings that have remained have been restored over these past 3 years. So it really looks like it looked original to me, but I learned by reading one of the signboards that it was really just a 3-year restoration process that ended at the end of 2024 to bring it back to this state. There used to be another gate right here, and so these are like the pilings for the gates. So this is one entrance house. This is like the first, well, the throne is over there, but the inner courtyard of the emperor is back here. And if any male wanted to pass a message on to the emperor, he'd have to wait outside in this building right here. pass a message on to a eunuch. A eunuch is a guy with no balls cut off, so he can't impregnate any of the women in the court and claim a future dynasty. And so someone would pass a message on to a male servant with no balls, and then that male servant with no balls, the eunuch, would pass on the message to the emperor who sat back here, and it would go back towards the person over here, and that person would run back over there and run back and ferry that message to the outside. So as you can see, it still looks like they're going to be doing some restorative work, but they started off with the main throne room first. So they start off with the big important stuff, and then they're working their way around the periphery on restorative works. So here you can kind of see what it looks like when it hasn't been fully restored, but only structurally repaired. You can see that the wood is fading. It's lacking that luster. And the paint has faded from the walls. The plaster is cracked. The brick is exposed. The paint here is also light. And so we saw the throne room just a few minutes ago, and you saw how bright red and gold everything was. And now inside, just 50 meters away from the throne room, is another building, ministerial building for governance and regulations. But you can tell here the gold has not been restored to the red pillars. So it's just not as shiny, and it doesn't pop as much. Yes, it's very hot. It's dead hot here. These would be the chairs for the emperor. This would be his sedan where he gets carried around, and his throne room chair. So here he would be picked up and carried by people. Here he would be wheeled around. And they were doing this up until the early 1900s. So as you can see, there's a recently planted tree right here, but as you can tell, the base far outsizes the width of this tiny little branch. So you can presume that at some point there was a much bigger tree here that, of course, got blown away by bombs. So, you know, here's me. Here's the width of me, much wider than me. So it would have been a much bigger tree, much thicker than my head. So here we have some bombed out remnants. This would be like an inner wall, and there would probably would have been some other buildings. Yeah. You can tell there's a foundation right here, and there's some steps leading up to it that are now covered in grass on the right hand side. But this would have been a building, and it probably would have been an interior courtyard. So you see these red gates over here. Most likely there would be another building surrounding this and enclosing it to make it a courtyard. I could totally imagine a bivouac being set up here and troops being encamped and then getting bombed the heck out by the French. This probably right here would have been a similar archway to what we see over here. What's kind of amazing is that in terms of geometrical design, it's reminiscent of Angkor Wat, the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Cambodia. That's the largest religious complex in the world. It's a symmetrical square design. And Angkor Wat was built in the 1300s, and that place is palatial, being a palace itself for the Hindu kings and the Buddhist kings of the empire at that time. Pardon my cough. This is actually a good air quality day in Vietnam, but the bad air quality has been catching up to me. But as I was saying, it's reminiscent of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. But Angkor Wat, even though it was built in the 1300s, the moat was way larger, the walls were way taller. And so the amount of engineering know-how and construction know-how and hydrology know-how to build these moats and to pump irrigation was just amazing that they were able to do that in the 1300s. So here you get a better view. So I could definitely tell that this, typically in Chinese design, that's like a water pot right here. But based on what we saw over here and the tiny tree and the big pot basin, I would assume that this is probably not a water pot that's right here, and assume that this is a water tree, or excuse me, not a water tree, but a tree outside before entering building. Here you see other steps from this side, and then steps from this side, and then there's the foundation right here. So this would be the outer building, and then this would be the courtyard right here, and then gates to the inner building. So we'll walk back via the shade. So you can kind of see that these lighter white spots over here would also be foundation stones and cornerstones for another building right here. So this would have been like an assembly area right here, and then you would have had another building right here, but it got destroyed too. So here, yep, you see like this would be the steps inside to an outer courtyard between this spot right here and this spot right here. So this would be like an alleyway kind of outer courtyard, and then the inner building would be right here. So you just kind of have to use your imagination on what sort of buildings would have been in place before they fell apart like you see on these walls over here. Um, right over here is a sign talking about the different dynasties. So this palace right here was the home of the Nguyen dynasty, and this dynasty and palace was the last dynasty in Vietnam from 1800 to 1945. So as I was quickly mentioning, on that side, there you see the big pot and the little tree. So here you got another big pot and another tree that's a little bit more mature, but still not as ancient as maybe 200 years old. So there definitely would have been tons of trees in this courtyard. But I was saying over here, what the sign talks about is basically how during two successive dynasties dating from the 1500s, the dynasty's emperors sent out teams of seafarers, explorers, and colonizers to build on these islands with their Vietnamese names. And these Vietnamese names are Hoang Sa and Trong Sa, and these are better known today in their English names as the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands, which are the two hotly contested island archipelagos in the South China Sea that every country in the South China Sea claims as their own. So right over here, you see this little long statement saying how from the 17th and 19th century onwards, we already established our sovereignty by putting colonies out there, sending people to fish and to grab clams and turtles and all that sort of stuff. But no one actually had a long-term civilized permanent there, civilized permanent settlement, because these were little reefs and atolls, and these reefs and atolls basically were like 1 feet too high or 2 feet high above sea level, and during high tide they would just be covered and submerged underneath water. So you couldn't really build if it's always being submerged. On top of that, these islands had no fresh water sources, which is why in the last hundreds of years, tons of nationalities have been going there to fish because they're shallow and well protected for fish to hatch and for other sea life to hatch, but it's not good for human settlement. But now that we've discovered that there's tons of minerals underneath these shallow sands, everyone wants to claim it as their own. So now the world is trying to figure out, okay, who actually owns these islands? They've not been settled. They've not been settled in centuries, but they've definitely been visited by vast amounts of people from different countries. So who owns them today? We don't know. So here you see another set of exterior buildings. You see a building to the left, a building to the right outside the wall, and here in the foreground would have been another building, but all we have left is a foundation. So you would have had a central pathway connecting from here on the left going across to the right to this building, and so there would have been buildings on all sides, on all cardinal points of the access, but once again kind of fallen into disrepair. Yep, so as I mentioned, here you would have had like a little path that connected all the way across here to this other side. But here we are in the interior This definitely probably would have been for the emperor. You can see like there's a pond right here, a landscape, and you can see various steps as you make your way to the right side. You can see all these steps. So basically that most likely would have been the emperor's royal palace right over here. And of course you always want to have a grand procession, an entryway, and so it would have been going higher and higher, a few steps at a time. But unfortunately there's no more buildings here. So the restoration looks like they've done the building that was all the way in the beginning, which was kind of the meeting room to meet visitors and guests, and they've finished the restoration on the back half of the emperor's residence. Oh, nice breezeway. Oh, see, and as I mentioned, there is a little pond right here, a little koi pond. So there would have been a koi pond on the other side that I was mentioning as well, where you saw those rocks. So that would have been a koi pond as well, and that would have been like a rock landscape. Typical Song Dynasty Chinese landscape painting with rocks and water. So we would have had more gardens over here. So these big urns that you see over here are pots of water. They collect rainwater, so if there was ever fires, because this whole place is made out of wood and starts burning, you just go over here, grab a little bucket, fill it with water, and start throwing it on the fire. So these would have been filled with rainwater.
Đi rồi là tí nữa anh chị em mình là không muốn đi đâu hết, chỉ ngồi đây thôi bởi vì là nó nóng rồi á.
A closer look at these big water pots. Yes, it's very hot out here, and they wore even more clothes back in the day. I don't know how they lasted. So as I mentioned, this is that crossing access. So now we'll go across and see what it leads to. This is a very small garden right here. Of course, the people were smaller back then. And I don't just refer to Vietnamese people, I refer to people in general. Humanity writ large was smaller in the past. Here would have been another building, as you see steps from here to another building over here. Yeah, so as I presumed, this would be a breezeway leading to another building right here. Unfortunately, the building has no longer here. But if you want to get a look at an idea of what it might have looked like, we can take a look to the right and see that it probably would have been similar to this building over here. It's a toasty 95 degrees right now. And yeah, here would have been another little pond. There probably used to be tons of turtles here in the past. Turtles symbolize longevity and prosperity in Chinese culture. And the Vietnamese culture was modeled after the Chinese culture. Oh, as I mentioned, here are the koi fish. At long last, the koi fish. But you can also tell that in the past the water was much higher than it is right now, just based on this water line right here. The water would have been at least another foot taller. So here you can see the difference, because in the past it would have been these gates right here with window seals. But here we have sort of these French pane windows with actual glass. So this is like a combination of French architecture and traditional Vietnamese imperial architecture molded together. And because, as you can tell on the inside, all these buildings are just made out of wood, very easy to fall apart by time. And so the foundations that we've been seeing on the outside, I had to put the mask on because I'm coughing, but the foundations that we've seen on the outside, what would have been on top of those foundations before, I was saying you just kind of have to imagine, but now we can kind of tell what would have been. So this is what would have been. You would have had a wood structure on top of this stone foundation, but now all that's left are these stone slabs. But these kind of parquet tile floors are also a French colonial style. So this probably would have been a more recent building than the one originally constructed in the beginning of the 1800s. You can see how ornate things are and how truly just the base of the building is all stone, and everything else is just plaster, brick, and wood. Notice the dragon on top of the gable. The winged horse, dragon, lion. That is a fixture of Eastern art. East Asian art, I should say. So once again, you have the parquet tiles, the geometric designs that are kind of reminiscent of Western Europe. Here you have miniature gardens, and this is definitely French influenced. You wouldn't have right angle geometric designs like this for the entire garden. As you can see, there would have been another building over here to this part right here. But this has definitely got some French influence with their garden styles. Chinese landscape, the gardens are different. They're more organic. They flow naturally with rounds and bends and curves. European gardens come in at more right angles. Right angles are used for pathways in Chinese landscapes to prevent zombies from running across at you in a straight path. So pathways in Chinese landscape architecture come at right angles all the time to prevent those zombies from running at you. But other than that, there are no right angles. So here we see what I'm talking about. You will see this kind of curvilinear edge to the koi pond right here, which follows the traditional Chinese landscape architecture style, and that melds into the right angle gardens of the French style. But there would have been walls all along here, so it's a pretty palatial place, and it's sad that it has been bombed out. So you really have to use your imagination to imagine what was left of this area. So this right here is the royal palace. This is where the emperor would have resided. But as you can tell, it's built much later. It has a very straight form, very boxy. Even the roofs are not a traditional East Asian structure. Not sure of what all these architectural terms are, but you could just tell it's got more of that French European colonial look to it, and built much later. So structurally it's a European building, but on the facade it's kind of a mix of new Vietnamese culture. So let's go inside and take a look. Everyone is super tired and gassed because it's hecka hot outside, so we'll just take a quick gander on the inside. More tile. It's like a museum on the inside. Definitely very French interior architecture as well. I mean, not as well, as well. And you've got the French crown molding at the top of the ceilings. You've got these like Rococo type mantelpieces right here. You even got the French double stairs. A French chair a la Beauty and the Beast. As I mentioned, an actual mantelpiece right here. A pretty small building. Okay, you can tell based on the structure over here, there would have been another building right here, a foundation that's no longer here. But these steps would have left to the anteroom. Okay, super hot, made it inside. So as I was mentioning, I saw a lot of melding of European and Asian influences, and we see right here what it says. That the 12th emperor of Vietnam, the second to the last emperor, was known as a person loving innovation and creativity, absorbing European culture and science to the construction of architectural works. And we move over here and we see that this is a typical building of Asian and European architectural styles with construction materials and different decorative motifs according to traditional themes. And this was, in fact, not constructed in the 1800s, as I stated, but as I was thinking, it was even much later, and even much later than I thought. The construction of this palace began in 1921. So here the French influence has completely solidified itself into the Vietnamese royal palace. But it will only last for about 20 years, because at the end of World War II, the communist revolutionaries would come into town and force the last emperor of Vietnam to give up his throne. And then this place was destroyed in 1947 after the end of that war, and rebuilt in 2019 and completed in 2023. So a lot of these buildings that we're seeing right now actually were or are not original, and they are basically rebuilt from the ground up from the last 2 years. I would say they've done a pretty good job. Here we are. I've walked back outside from the Royal Palace building. So the Royal Palace is not just this building, but there are a few adjoining buildings as well, because this would have been a tiny Royal Palace. Like, honestly, there are homes in Texas that are bigger than this Royal Palace. And that just speaks, the size of this Royal Palace just speaks to the diminished power and sovereignty of the Nguyen dynasty towards the end of its reign. The fact that the Royal Palace isn't that much bigger than a normal-sized McMansion in Texas. But you can see that there were other rooms here. But even still, I mean, this would just be the footprint of a garage in a house in Texas. But yes, as you can tell, these structures have fallen apart into disrepair, unfortunately. And so they haven't rebuilt these, but they did restore this main building right here. But even as I looked at some of the old pictures that were around the grounds of this place, a lot of the old pictures that I saw, actually, in fact, the grounds and the buildings were already falling into disrepair in the mid to late 1800s. And so what you see right here, this building actually was built on the remains of another foundation from previous structures in that dynasty, and as well as other dynasties. So essentially, this place has been used as the home for Imperial Vietnam, but over the years, as each dynasty sort of lost its power, the buildings would eventually fade away and fall apart as well. And so this building that we see right here, as I mentioned, it incorporates European motifs and structural elements, because Europe was very strong at that time, And so when this was built, it was built in the latter half of the last dynasty of Vietnam. And they imported Western ideas and Western building elements to sort of beef up the sovereignty of their own dynasty, which unfortunately was not much left of a destiny, because 20 years after the construction of this palace right here, this whole place would be blown to bits by the French. Yeah, let's take a look at that lengthwise view of the house. The main structure is only about 50 feet wide from that portico where the two people are walking out of. So it's only 50 feet wide in the middle third. The left third and the right third are also only about maybe 40 feet. So this whole structure is not even like 150 feet wide. And many homes in Texas are bigger than what you see here. Of course, like I said, this would have been the granny flat or a side garage or another cottage in Texas, but still not very big. And finally, we've reached the back of the Imperial City. Sometimes I find it ironic because you make a person walk like a mile almost to get to your building, to make it seem like he has to go on this long, arduous process to see you, this long process of walking under the heat and suffering to submit before the Holy Emperor or whatever. But then it's so far back that it's basically right next to all the peons on the outside. So I've always found that kind of architectural design and layout of buildings kind of funny. And here at the back is the very last building constructed in the Royal Palace. This was built in 1932. So that's why it's almost close in size to American homes, because it's built kind of at the time when America was prospering, as I mentioned, when the rest of the West was prospering. This is just like a normal villa that you would find in Europe. I find it kind of basic and boring. I mean, shoot, this house has even got the dimensions for a driveway through a motor carriage. So yeah, built in 1932. There were cars already back then, and this would have been the driveway for a car. But that was kind of the thing at the time, was that how do we restore our power to the Vietnamese? So we end the tour here under the eave of the Relaxation Library. I'm not joking. This was the place where the emperor built for himself to relax in 1841 to 1847. And as he was doing 175 years ago, relaxing and resting, I too am resting and relaxing. So this will be the end of the tour. I'm pretty gassed, I'm pretty tired. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you made it all the way to the end, please give me a thumbs up in the comment section to say you watched it. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed the video.